Happy 2024! It is a new year, and that means it is time to go through the books that I read in 2023 and share with you the highlights. Now, I have 23 books here today to share with you, and the first 13 I'm going to try and go through quite quickly, just give a brief reason why I enjoyed it, and then for the top 10 I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. That is the plan. I read over 200 books in 2023, so I felt that just having the top 10 was not going to be quite enough. So without further ado, the first one is Lot by Schola von Reinhold, and this is a sort of academic book, or it's about academia. It's about a woman who goes to do her master's and starts to find out things about a group of black men and women back in the 20s who were kind of the black equivalent of the bright young things. They've sort of been obscured by history, so it's really about what is chosen to be remembered, who gets to write history, and sort of resurfacing these things that have been written out of history. So she's sort of piecing this together and finding photographs and diaries and all sorts of different things. A really interesting way of looking at academia. Then we have 17 by Joe Gibson. This is a memoir about a young man who had an affair with his female teacher at school and ended up married to her, and how that's affected his life, and he's sort of reflecting back. It's a lot about the kind of boys will be boys kind of masculinity and the way that the young men express that, and how, you know, it's quite normal to have a crush on a teacher, but what happens when that actually turns into something more. And this was fascinating, absolutely heartbreaking. I think if you liked a book like My Dark Vanessa, this would be an interesting companion piece to that, because it's the genders are flipped and this is fiction, but it has a lot of the same kind of themes of, you know, what happens as these children become adults. Then we have The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I know this book has been out for a while. It's a short story collection, and there is a reason that everyone raves about it. It is absolutely delightful and wonderful. It is about all these different women who are not connected, but it's to do with their relationship with sexuality and with religion, exploring what it means to be black and female and religious, and how those different elements interact. A really wonderful collection of short stories, and the only short story collection on this list, actually. Then we have a novella by Patrick Rothfuss, came out this year, The Narrow Road Between Desires. This is an expanded version of a short story that came out quite a few years ago called The Lightning Tree. So if you have read that, you essentially know the story. I would recommend this if you're a fan of Patrick Rothfuss's work. If you've read The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear and you like Bast as a character, it really focuses on him, but it does stand on its own. If you wanted to dip your toes into Patrick Rothfuss's writing, this would be a place to start if you didn't want to dive into his larger works, but you will get more out of it if you've read The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear. But his prose is just extraordinary, and that's the thing I most enjoy about Patrick Rothfuss's work, is just how he draws you into the story and the characters with this wonderful lyrical prose. So highly recommend. Then we have Briefly a Delicious Life. Now, I should pause very briefly and to say that there are three themes that I've noticed in my list of top books of last year. One being swimming, which we will get to, another being classical music, and the other being academia, which we will see probably the most of throughout this list. But this is partly to do with classical music because it is about the real life characters of Frédéric Chopin and Georges Sand, and their sort of unconventional relationship. They go to stay at a place in Majorca, which is haunted by a ghost who is our narrator, She falls in love with George Sand, and she also just observes everything that's going on in their lives. So it's really about what it means to be human, to be alive, and what it means to be different as well. Throughout the story, we learn more about the ghost and how she came to be a ghost. So it gives this lovely tension as well. It's a beautifully written book, sort of slow and reflective and a bit like Chopin's music. It's absolutely wonderful. Then we have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's been too long since I read any of Ishiguro's works, and this is the one that reminded me the most of Never Let Me Go, because it is sort of science fiction. It's set in the near future where artificial intelligence has come to the point where you can buy artificial friends, robots who will be a companion, especially to children. And this story is written from the perspective of an AF, artificial friend, and her sort of learning about the child that she goes to live with, and the circumstances around that. She doesn't always necessarily understand everything that's going on a human level, which is really interesting, and something that Kazuo Ishiguro just does so expertly. There are so many questions within this, and some of them are answered, but some of them are left open-ended, much like in Never Let Me Go and his other works. And it's beautifully, expertly done, and Kazuo Ishiguro doesn't disappoint. And we have You Deserve Nothing by Alexander Maxick. This is a kind of dark academia book that is set at a high school. It is sort of really steeped in existentialist philosophy. It's from three perspectives: a teacher, a young female student who he's having an affair with, and another student who really idolizes this teacher. The thing I loved the most about this book is that a lot of it takes place in the classroom, and that is something I feel is missing from a lot of dark academia novels, and I love it when we have these connections between what's being discussed in the classroom, in this case on a philosophical level, and the connections between that and what's happening in their real lives around them, and how they use the knowledge and the philosophy to sort of navigate what's going on around them. And so it's about how the boy who's one of the narrators really idolizes this teacher, and when he finds out about the affair he's having with the other student, it changes the way he sees the world. So that was what was most enjoyable about this book. And I wish more academia books would do that and really combine the academic setting with the story that's going on. It's something that Secret History does very, very well, and I don't see it enough. Then we have Ghost Music by Annie Yu. This is a beautiful little book. It is about a woman in Beijing. She goes to live with her husband. Well, she's living with her husband. They have to move in with her mother-in-law, and these mushrooms start arriving. They're not sure where they've come from, but they're sort of really unusual mushrooms, and ones that are only found in the place where her mother-in-law grew up. And the protagonist feels very ignored by her husband. She befriends a pianist who had disappeared years before, so it's kind of the ghost music side of it. And there are all these different elements that sort of don't seem to be connected, and yet we're never quite sure what's real. And I really want to reread this actually, because I think you get a lot more from it, and maybe have even more questions reading it for a second time. But it's beautifully written, and also I love this cover. This cover has a lot going on within it that you start to notice as you read more of the story. and I love it when covers do that. Then we have Big Swiss. This is by Jen Began, and it is such a strange book. It's a very tense book because it's about a transcriptionist who gets sent these recordings from a therapist, and it's her job to transcribe the interaction between the therapist and the patient. And so she gets to learn all about these different people's lives that she's never met, and she gets quite obsessed with one of the women who she calls Big Swiss. One day at the park, at the dog park, recognizes the voice of Big Swiss and realizes that this woman is somebody that she sort of knows intimately and yet doesn't know at all, and certainly Big Swiss doesn't know her at all. So it's about the friendship that forms between these two women and how sort of one-sided it is. It has a great deal of tension because of that, and it's quite stressful, but it is absolutely fascinating and a really, really interesting read. And we have The Swimmers by Chloe Lane. This is a New Zealand novel which came out, I think it came out this year or last year, and I picked it up because of the title. As I said, books about swimming, love that. And it has swimming as a motif throughout it. It's a very important thing, but it's really about family and this mother-daughter relationship. The protagonist goes to stay with her mother and aunt for a week or so, and at the beginning of the trip she learns that her mother, who has been ill for many, many years, has decided she wants to end her own life, and that she wants to die on Tuesday. And that's kind of the opening. The rest of the book is her and her aunt trying to figure out how to do this in a humane way, and also dealing with the grief that comes with this, and the effect emotionally that it has upon them. She starts doing some weird things. She has a strange interaction with a man in the swimming pool at the middle of the night. She starts stealing things. There are other bizarre things that happen, sort of along the lines of books like Tessa Moshfegh, where you have just women doing weird and questionable, unethical things. But throughout we have this wonderful motif of swimming, and that it's something that really connects the women in this family. There's one point where she goes to a swimming pool and she's kind of using swimming to deal with what she's going through, to process her emotions and her feelings and all the thoughts that are going through her head. That was really wonderful. And also there's a scene towards the end where they all go to the beach. It's very, very poignant, and it's sort of a way about how water is this connecting force between these women as well. Then we have Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This is another book that came out a couple of years ago. It's dual narrative. On the one hand, we have this female pilot who circumnavigated the globe, and we know that her plane went down. It crashed, she disappeared. I think her logbook was found. And then in the present day, we have an actress in Hollywood who's playing her, this real life woman in a film of her life. There's this wonderful tension between the two stories because we know how the first one ends, and we're also finding out, as the actress finds out more about this woman, sort of the interpretation of her life and how the film studio wants to portray her, and she's got to make some decisions as an actress as well. It's an absolutely wonderful story about women's place in history. Yeah, just a really great read, a really fantastic piece of historical fiction, expertly done with those two narratives. Then we have The Writing Retreat, which is quite a different kind of book. I don't read a lot of crime thrillers, but this was great, and again had that kind of academic flavour because it's about a writer who goes on this retreat. She enters to be a participant on this retreat, and she's delighted when she gets in because it's run by one of her all-time favourite authors. She has sort of this perpetual writer's block, and she's hoping that going on this retreat will get her writing mojo back and she will be able to actually complete something. To throw a spanner in the works, a woman who was previously her best friend and now she's had this massive falling out with is also on the retreat, so there's a tension between the two of them, and then things start happening, weird things start happening, people start disappearing, there's this whole kind of gothic mysterious vibe happening, and it's very unexpected and kind of it's a really fun read. Not the sort of most serious thing I've read this year, but yeah, it's got like kind of Agatha Christie feel to it because of its remote location and everything, and they're all snowed in, and it's very atmospheric as well. So great book. Really enjoyed that one. Right, then we have The Lake of Dead Languages by Carol Goodman. You can probably tell by this cover that this book has been out for a while. It's looking a little bit dated. I've had this on my TBR for years and finally managed to get hold of a copy of the audiobook of it, and a physical copy as well. This is about a woman who she attended this boarding school growing up, and now she's returned as a teacher. There's sort of tragedy that's happened in the past. Two of her friends drowned in the lake on which the boarding school is located on the banks of, and she's worried that the same thing is going to happen again. As often happens with elite sort of an older boarding schools, there's a lot of mythology around the school and the lake. Really loved the atmosphere, especially of this one. It's the lake freezes over, so it's got that very wintry feel to it. Definitely one to read in the cooler months. Okay, so we're on to the top 10, and at number 10 we have Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. This, in contrast to The Lake of Dead Languages, is set in the summer in a heat wave in the UK. Again, elite boarding school. This is about a professor, an Australian professor who goes to work at this school. She is gay, and that is a big sort of part of the discussions in this book and what it means to be a queer woman, especially in these kind of more elite institutions. She basically falls in love with the headmaster's wife, Mrs. S, the titular character, and it goes from there. The atmosphere of this book is wonderfully sort of oppressive with the heat, and it's one of those things that I really love in fiction. Books like Call Me By Your Name have it, Hot Milk by Deborah Levy. Both of those are quite different but have some of the same themes as this. The writing style is very different though. I know some people found this writing style to be a bit sort of choppy and blunt. I didn't find that to be the case. I listened to the audiobook of this one, and it didn't bother me. It's kind of a romance, but there are so many more sort of discussions and things going on within this book, and I thought it was excellent. Then we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkinson. This is another book that came out a couple of years ago. It's about a woman who she's either dying or has just died, and she's left a tape for her children so that she can spill all the family secrets and they can find out sort of what happened in her past. And there are a lot of family secrets. It turns out that she's actually from a Caribbean island and grew up there. She has to run away from there to escape a marriage that she doesn't want. So she flees to the UK, and there's a lot of drama in there and things that happen, and yes, secrets that are all big news to her children. There's also this theme of swimming in this book too. The mother was a marathon swimmer. Lovely descriptions of her going out and swimming even in storms, and how that brought her a lot of physical but also mental strength, and I really appreciated that side of it as well. Then we have Pet by Catherine Chidgey, and this is a book about, again, it's an academic setting. I'm sorry there are so many of them in this list, but there were a lot of great ones this year. This came out, I think, in 2022. It's a New Zealand book. It's set in the 1980s, and protagonist is a girl 12 or 13. She has this very charismatic teacher. All the students absolutely love her. All of them want to be her pet, the teacher's pet, hence the name. And things start going missing from the classroom. Not things of great monetary value, but things that are, emotionally important to people. So the protagonist's mother died when she was a bit younger, and she has this pen that her mother had given her, and that goes missing. And obviously that's great emotional importance to her. And other things from other students disappear throughout the term as well. And so it's kind of this mystery about who's stealing the things, but also the teacher starts to insert herself into the students' lives in ways that are not exactly appropriate. The students will run errands for her, which are things that definitely shouldn't be done by students, like picking up her medication. So it goes well beyond just cleaning the blackboard at the end of the day. The teacher starts to have a closer relationship with her father as well, and sort of starts to step into the role of mother for her. She's going through puberty. She has to go and have a bra fitted, and the teacher takes her to that because her father is so kind of unsure of how it all works. So a lot of things that are, especially today and from an adult perspective, are very inappropriate, but maybe in the context of the time and from the perspective of the student, doesn't seem like it's that, she sees it as this great honor that she's being helped by her teacher, but actually it's deeply inappropriate and a bit ick. A book that really builds and builds, and you don't expect it, but then it kind of hits you around the head. There's so much more happening than meets the eye. It was a surprising book, and one that I read in over a couple of days. I just couldn't put it down. It was so engrossing. Another book that I kind of couldn't put down but also wanted to keep stopping and making notes about was Tiepolo Blue by James Cahill. It's about a professor at Cambridge in the 90s. He's a professor of this painter called Tiepolo, an Italian Renaissance painter. One day in the quadrangle of his college at Cambridge, an artist puts in an installation, which is sanctioned by the college. It's not just a random act of art. It's this piece of modern art that he absolutely detests. Basically, that is the catalyst that sets off some events that eventually gets him, if not fired, then pushed out of his job at Cambridge. And he's never left Cambridge. He went through his schooling and he went to Cambridge, he became a professor, and he's just stayed there. And you kind of get the impression that this man is really quite old, but actually he's only in his 40s. But he has that kind of curmudgeonly personality where he's so stuck in his ways and will not change a thing about his personality and his views. So then he goes out into the world, and he gets a job at a private art museum in South London, and his sort of eyes are opened to different worlds, and it's sort of about him exploring his sexuality as well, as a gay man, and a lot of references to Ian Forster's Morris. In fact, there's even a character in here called Morris Forster, which is maybe a little bit on the nose. It really has a similar structure to Morris as a novel, and it also has a lot in common with the writing of Patrick Gale or Alan Hollinghurst. We've got a lot of references to art in here as well. I found myself underlining things a lot. Certain things happen where we're not entirely sure what's real and what's not, which is always something that I enjoy. There's a lot more to this book than kind of meets the eye, I think, and I really, really enjoyed it, which is why it is in my top 10. Right, back to school again. We have Madam by Phoebe Wynne. This is another really dark academia, very gothic feeling novel. It is set in the north of Scotland at this elite boarding school. The main character is a newly hired professor of Greek, is it Greek and Latin? Classics teacher. She is the first outsider either ever or in sort of living memory to be hired at this school, and there's something weird going on at the school, but she doesn't know what. She has her trepidations about taking this job because it kind of seems too good to be true. The pay is really good. They've offered to help to look after her ailing mother, so she can't really turn it down. But there's something that we know from the beginning is off about this place. It's got that kind of never let me go feeling to it, where you know something is not right, but it takes a while for us to kind of discover the depth of it. It's got echoes of Margaret Atwood, beautifully atmospheric novel as well, with the setting along the cliffs in the north of Scotland, and so it's very remote, very gothic, kind of Jane Eyre feel to it as well, and yeah, this is excellent. I would definitely recommend. It's one I want to read again. Just great. Another just great book is The Centre, and this is one that did come out this year. It again has kind of academic vibes to it. I wouldn't call it dark academia. I'd call it more sort of academia or a dark academia adjacent, because it's not set at a school. Although we start off with this woman who she meets a man who seems to just know all these languages, and when she kind of quizzes him, he isn't very actually good at picking up languages. She thinks that she can teach him a little bit, and he just doesn't seem to have an ear for it. And yet one day, you know, they're dating and she takes him to meet her parents, and suddenly he can speak this whole other language. She's like, okay, what's going on? This is so bizarre. And eventually he tells her, oh, there's this place, this called The Centre, and you can go and you can learn a language within a matter of, I think it's a few weeks. You have to pay an enormous amount of money, and it's all very secretive, so you can only tell one other person about it, and this is me telling you about it, so that's quite a big deal. And so of course she kind of thinks over it and decides. She's a translator as well, by the way, so it's quite an important part of her job. It's not like she just wants to learn French for the hell of it. So she decides, okay, I'm going to go to the centre, pay all this money and learn German. And at the centre, again, things are not quite as they seem. We know that there's something weird going on, but it's unclear what. And there's always this question of, how does this actually work? How does one osmosize? That's not a word. Absorb a language by osmosis in such a short period of time, and then be able to speak it fluently. And it kind of becomes this thriller where things are getting more and more tangled. She learns more and more about the truth of things, a lot about sort of colonialism and discussions about how language is power, really. And also about the technicalities of and philosophy of translation. Really, really interesting. But all wrapped up in this story that is just gripping, absolutely gripping. Highly recommend this. I don't feel like I've done it justice with my descriptions, but it is fantastic. Okay, before we get into the top three, we have a non-fiction book, the only non-fiction book in my top 10, and this is Small Bodies of Water by Nina Minga Powles. It's a collection of essays, and I think my connection to this might be quite different to other people's. I mean, on any level, it's a wonderful collection, beautifully written. She's a poet, so that really comes through in her language. So she is a New Zealander. She was born in China, or of Chinese descent, and now she lives in London. So a lot of things within this were things that I could really resonate with as a Kiwi, and especially when she's talking about living in London. She talks about looking for signs of of New Zealand in London, and one being the kowhai tree, which is this flower that's on the cover, and it's a very vibrant yellow, and it blooms in New Zealand, and she finds one in London, which is very exciting to her. The first essay is called A Girl Swimming is a Body of Water, which is really just like such a beautiful title. And that one's about swimming. And then the second one is about earthquakes. It's called The Safe Zone, and it's about her living in Wellington and the knowledge living in Wellington that Wellington is long overdue a really big earthquake sitting between two tectonic plates. And that's an experience I've had as well, living in Wellington, sort of walking around, especially after the Christchurch earthquakes, walking around and thinking, like, how would this look, or what would I do if there was an earthquake? There are a lot of reminders in the city of that as well. That kind of anxiety is something that I didn't think was unique to me, but I haven't really heard anyone else talk about in this way, and that was fascinating. It's the same one when she's talking about the kowhai, where she talks about a passage in Catherine Mansfield that I particularly like as well, where she mistakes the kowhai with another flower because she's been away from New Zealand for so long. There's another one where she talks about a book that I happen to have on my shelf. There are just all these little connections, like, oh, fancy seeing you here, kind of thing. But even without those, this is still a wonderful collection. There are other essays in here that I didn't connect to as much on a personal level, because they're about her experience of race and food and culture that were fascinating, but I didn't connect to on the same way, but were just really interesting to learn about. Again, especially the way she writes, it's beautiful. There's a lot about swimming in here as well, small bodies of water being a relevant title. Then we are on to the top three, and I'm not quite sure what order to put these in, because they're all so different, and all three of them are going on to my favorite books of all time list, for sure. Two of them I've read twice. The only reason I haven't read the other one is because it's not available as an audiobook. The first one here, so this is The Will of the Many by James Islington. And when I finished listening to this, I immediately went back to the beginning and started it again. And that is quite an unusual thing for me to do. This book is the closest thing to the feeling of reading The Name of the Wind that I found in a long time. It's definitely the best fantasy book I've read in a long time as well. So it is about a man he's a sole survivor of the royal family of an island that has been conquered by the hierarchy, which is like it's based on Roman history. The hierarchy basically has, as it sounds, it's a physical hierarchy where people will cede will is what it's called, to people above them in the hierarchy. The people who are at the top will have more power and magic because it's being fed to them by people below them in the hierarchy. The protagonist doesn't want to have to cede his will to anybody else because his family was destroyed because of it. His culture doesn't believe in it. For good reason. It's a really messed up system. Okay, I'm going to read the blurb because there's so much to cover and this does a much better job than I could. So the Catane Republic, the hierarchy, they may rule the world now, but they do not know everything. I tell them my name is Viz Telemus. I tell them I was orphaned after a tragic accident 3 years ago, and that good fortune alone has led to my acceptance into their most prestigious school. I tell them that once I graduate, I will gladly join the rest of civilized society in allowing my strength, my drive, my focus, what they call will, to be leached away and added to the power of those above me, as millions already do, as all must eventually do. I tell them that I belong and that they believe me. But the truth is that I've been sent to the academy to find answers, to solve a murder, to search for an ancient weapon, to uncover secrets that may tear the Republic apart. And that I will never ever cede my will to the empire that executed my family. To survive though, I will have to rise through the Academy's ranks. I'll have to smile and make friends and pretend to be one of them and win. Because if I cannot, then those who want to control me, who know my real name, will no longer have any use for me. And if the hierarchy finds out who I truly am, they will kill me. That obviously doesn't cover everything, but it really does have that kind of Patrick Rothfuss feel to it, with certain moments that happen to him at the Academy, the way he makes friends and enemies, but it's done in a really unique way. This is quite different, very different from any other sort of high fantasy that I have read before, and I just thought it was masterfully done. This is the first in at least a trilogy, and I am really looking forward to reading the next one. As I said, I got to the end, I went straight back to the beginning. It's one of those books that you're going to find more and more in as you go. Like, wonderful characters. The writing isn't as poetic as Patrick Rothfuss, but whose writing is. Absolutely deserves to be on my top books of all time list for sure. All right, then we have a very different book, Honeybees and a Distant Thunder by Riku Onda. This is translated by Philip Gabriel. This is a book where it seems like the stakes would not be that high. It's about a piano competition, and it follows 3 main candidates within this competition, all of whom have very different reasons for being there, very different philosophies on music, and it's about their journeys through this competition, through the ranks, and it's sort of split into each part of the competition. It's a book where not that much happens. Like, you know, there is a structure to this competition, and we know that there's going to be a winner at the end, but what I loved about this was the descriptions of the music. And we could have the same piece of music played by 3 or 4 different people and described in very different ways that are still interesting. It is absolutely masterfully done. You would expect it to be very slow paced, and in some ways it is, and yet the way the music is described is so beautiful and so vivid that you kind of don't care that it's taking pages and pages to get through one piece of music. Now, I may be biased as somebody who loves classical music and who is kind of familiar with classical music competitions like this, having grown up doing them, not at this high level, but participating in music competitions. I think it's something that you could enjoy even if you're not really steeped in that whole world. Just the writing is really beautiful, and I found myself, as I was reading, both wanting to go and listen to the pieces of music that have been described, because most of them are real pieces of music. There's sort of one main fictional piece, but also I wanted to experience the music through the words first. So I would like to go back and reread this, but read it with the music alongside it, to kind of compare my own experience of listening to it to the experience of these different characters who are listening to other characters play the music. And there's so much about the interpretation of it as well that I don't know how well that would line up with listening to a recording. So super interesting. I mean, this is one of the few books this year that really made me cry, but in a like, this is what life is about kind of way, not a this is totally devastating kind of way. I felt myself on the edge of my seat wanting to know who was going to get through to the next round. I don't know how she did it, but she totally captured everything that I needed within this book, and it's absolutely extraordinary. I cannot recommend it enough, especially if you're a classical music fan. It is a must read, and I bought one of her other books to read as well. It sounds like it's a very different kind of book, but I really trust her as an author now, so looking forward to reading more of Riku Onda's stuff. Finally, and not necessarily the top of these 3, because I can't quite choose, but It is Chlorine by Jade Song. So I love that the top 3 books really represent, you know, the academia, the classical music, and the swimming. All 3 themes that really have run through my favorite books of this year. And Chlorine is a bit bonkers. Not everyone is going to love this. It's about a young woman she's growing up. She's a competitive swimmer, and we know from fairly early on in the book that she has become a mermaid. We don't know how or why, but there are these letters from her friend that her friend is writing to her in the sea. So we know that that's where it ends up, but this is a matter of how she ends up at that point. Now, this is a very visceral book. It is about growing up as a young woman, so there's quite a lot about periods. There's a very sort of traumatic scene where she's trying to insert a tampon for the first time. It's about her becoming sexually active. There is SA in this as well, so just be aware of that. There is also a scene where she has a copper IUD implanted, and that is very traumatic to read. Most of all, it's about swimming. It's about how swimming makes her feel free, how it makes her feel strong. This is the first paragraph. You are not here of your own free will. You are here because I desired you first. I lured you to me using my intentional charms, my ethereal beauty, my siren song, my 6-pack, my tail with scales embroidered in flesh. So that kind of gives you a bit of a sense of the viscerality that is to come, the physicality. And yet, even though it's very sort of strongly gross and visceral and icky and really traumatic in many ways, it is also what I think is a wonderful exploration of what it is like to be a woman and to have your body change. And as she does change into a mermaid at the end, there's this wonderful kind of metaphor for wanting to change your body and not feeling like you are yourself within the body that you're born in. So it's kind of this trans metaphor as well. But also, even if you're not trans, I think there's a lot that I resonated with about growing up and your body kind of changing and almost feeling like your body is betraying you, and doing these things that you never asked it to do. And I just thought that was wonderfully done and explored in a really interesting way. And yeah, I think Jade Song's done an amazing job with this book. It's not going to be for everyone for the reasons outlined before. She has a very strong narrative voice as well, as you can probably tell from that paragraph. Not everyone is going to love that. I found it to be very affecting. The strength of it and her convictions was sort of so unlike my own convictions as a teenager growing up, that I found that very refreshing. She's not somebody who's insecure and timid in any way. She's a very bold character, and I enjoyed that. I found that very refreshing. Yeah, this is a wonderful book. I listened to the audiobook of it twice, and yeah, it's beautifully crafted, well narrated, a wonderful queer narrative. Oh yes, it's very gay as well. The main character has these different interactions with men and women throughout too, and sort of about her exploring her body. Very wonderfully done. So those were the 23 top books of 2023. Have you read any of these? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I feel like quite a lot of these books could be very polarizing, especially books like Tieplo Blue and Chlorine. Are you going to love them or are you going to hate them? I would love to know in the comments what your favorite book or books were of 2023. I'm definitely looking for some recommendations for 2024. If you got this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.